And it's BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Tuesday. Welcome to True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. I am your host, Black Box Ned. And because today is Tuesday, you can say hello to Snoopy. And how's everybody doing? We have DNA King here saying howdy. It's great to start the day off with BBOR. DNA King, thank you for joining us. Now, True Crime Talk Radio in the morning is a segment where I talk about multiple subjects within a single episode. And you can put anything you want in the live chat, and I'll try my best to respond to that. Now, as far as today's episode goes, I've been watching a lot of videos about psychology, and on the Monday show, Zodiac Monday, someone had recommended doing a direct response to Dr. Todd Grande's psychological assessment of the Zodiac killer, and I'm going to interweave some of those things in there. But to provide the biggest nutshell introduction to the Dark Triad traits is that the Dark Triad is psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and narcissism. And one thing that people really want to reinforce as they are having these types of discussions and conversations online is the Dark Triad is not a set of disorders, they are traits. They can have clinical diagnoses, like someone can be diagnosed as a clinical psychopath, but these are traits that people have. And to go through them one by one, firstly, psychopathy is conventionally diagnosed by the Hare checklist, which is a 20-item checklist, and the maximum score is 40. So, like for each question, you can get a 0, a 1, or 2. And if you score a 30 out of 40 or higher, you're a psychopath. But just prior to the start of this episode, I read that in the United Kingdom, they do things differently. A psychopath in the United Kingdom only requires a 25 out of 40 or higher. So I guess across the pond, they determine what a psychopath is a little bit more easily than in the United States. Then you have narcissism. And every time I watch a YouTube channel that's talking about narcissism, they provide a different definition. But I'm going to share with you guys the definition that I first learned about, because we often gravitate toward the first definition that we learned. Narcissism, when I hear this word, I just think of what someone once told me. It's a person who thinks that they can do no wrong. You're going to find all these definitions. Oh, they're people that are full of themselves. They're people that like admiration and sometimes vanity, of course, going back to the story of Narcissus from mythology. But ultimately, that's how it was introduced to me. When people use the term narcissistic in terms of the Dark Triad, it's someone who thinks that they can do no wrong. That's why they don't like to be confronted and they don't like to be challenged. Then we have Machiavellianism. Again, there are going to be countless people online giving their own definitions of Machiavellianism. The first one that I heard about was actually one that I got from Dr. Todd Grande's channel that I was listening to years ago, and that is that someone believes that they are superior to the laws of society or the rules of a system, so they don't have to pay attention to them, and they can kind of interweave around them. They can move around the laws as opposed to following them. And these are going to be traits that are heavily, heavily connected to stories that are in the true crime world. Because this is True Crime Talk Radio, I would really want to zone in on some of the aspects that are related to true crime cases. And I've already said Dr. Todd Grande's name twice. He has countless videos on the Dark Triad in all types of different ways and aspects. And Classic Chevy Cat is here, morning led, listening to you while on the treadmill. Classic Chevy Cat, thank you so much. And I appreciate all your support over the years. And so does Snoopy. But Dr. Todd Grande shared one thing in a video about how with psychopathic serial killers and murderers, I mean, this goes beyond serial killers. With psychopathic murderers, 93% of the crimes committed by them are premeditated. And with people who are not psychopaths, 43 to 49% of the crimes that are committed by them, the murders that are committed by them are premeditated. So you got someone like 49% versus 93%. That means that when psychopaths commit murder, the overwhelming majority of these cases, it is a premeditated incident. So this brings me to the story of the Zodiac killer. And as I said, I watched this video on the Zodiac as well. And the Zodiac is somebody who really would be a little bit difficult to gauge. Is he a narcissist or is he a psychopath? Now, let's bear in mind, psychopaths and narcissists have some overlap. all psychopaths and sociopaths are narcissistic, but not all narcissists are psychopaths and sociopaths. That's the famous thing that you're going to hear that gets plastered all over the internet. But with the Zodiac killer, most people believe that the Zodiac premeditated his Blue Rock Springs shooting, his Lake Berryessa stabbing, and the Stein murder. These are crimes 2, 3, and 4, respectively. There's a little bit of gray area as to whether or not the Zodiac premeditated the Lake Herman Road murders. And I was even just talking about this on a recent episode of True Crime Talk Radio, saying it's quite possible that the Zodiac didn't even mean to commit the Lake Herman Road murders, or when he woke up that morning, he didn't have the plan to commit murder. It's somebody who was just very upset. And this is something that you do experience when serial killers are operating. The first crime is not planned. However, 93% does not mean 100% of the time. So there was another video that Dr. Todd Grande did about how you could use language to identify a psychopath. And this one was something that I thought was very interesting and very engaging. And Melissa is here. She says, "Good morning, Ned. Glad I could listen in today." Hey, Melissa, welcome. And thanks for the coffee, by the way. Cheers to you, and cheers from Snoopy. But in terms of using language to identify a serial killer or a psychopathic serial killer versus just someone who is high in narcissism, Dr. Todd Grande pointed out that psychopaths and sociopaths are more likely to use words and language that are relevant to the basic necessities of life, specifically with food, drink, and money. Now, if you call money a basic necessity of life, I suppose it is. And I was just thinking, that is so weird. That is just so different, like a different type of experience, hearing that psychopaths and sociopaths are all about food, drink, and money. I'm not completely shocked, but in terms of analyzing language that is associated with a story like the Zodiac killer, about the Zodiac's letters, I mean, of course, I couldn't think of too many examples about that, talking about food, drink, and money. Then there's the next part. People who are narcissistic, but not sociopathic, are going to use language that is going to be talking more about belief systems, more about religion, more about precise details and activities. Then I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I mean, I've seen so many pieces of evidence that would suggest that the Zodiac killer was a psychopath or a sociopath, but that type of language is all just about narcissism. The Zodiac killer wrote letters taking credit for his crimes. And he's not just talking about the basic necessities of life. He's talking about belief systems and ideas and showing off. And the Zodiac was overwhelmingly narcissistic. And this is one that I think goes a little bit without saying. And we have Lacey here. Lacey says, "Good morning." Hey, good morning to you too, Lacey. Now, as far as being narcissistic goes, it's possible that the Zodiac was just very full of himself. He was like talking about how he wanted to kill people so he would die and be reborn in paradise, and those whom he had killed would be his slaves. That's the narcissistic language that is found in his letters. And the Zodiac is also telling people to wear buttons because please wear some nice Zodiac buttons, no nasty ones that Melvin Belli has going around. Okay, we get it. The Zodiac was a narcissist. In Dr. Todd Grande's psychological assessment of the Zodiac killer, he said that some of the appropriate diagnoses for the Zodiac could be antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, or possibly schizotypal personality disorder. On the most recent Zodiac Monday, I was talking about how I didn't really think that schizotypal personality disorder worked out. But let's look at this. Let's look at this. Because this is relevant to the Dark Triad. No matter whom you're thinking about, no matter which individual comes to mind, the Dark Triad is narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. Now, there are clinical diagnoses in the DSM that correspond with two of these traits. With psychopathy, that corresponds with antisocial personality disorder. With narcissism, of course, narcissistic personality disorder. But with Machiavellianism, there is not a direct diagnosis that corresponds with that. There's not a direct mental disorder that corresponds with Machiavellianism based on the definition that has been laid out. And because Lacey is here in the chat, Lacey, you recommended a story once, and was it the case of Josh McDonald? Did I get his name right? Because I was reading up a little bit about that one. Was that it? And then if so, I will talk about that a little bit later on. But in terms of the way that the Dark Triad functions, we have the clinical understandings of these things, and we have the common day-to-day conversational understandings of these things. And by Dr. Todd Grande's own admission, that just because you have a coworker that's a jerk or a mean person, you think that person's a narcissist. Just because they're acting like they don't care about other people, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a psychopath. And it's an impractical approach to just sort of start labeling your coworkers or your past relationships as your exes as narcissists and psychopaths. However, I was just going through his types of material and thinking about, well, what can we do then? Because I mean, if you can't necessarily use that type of thought process, and you're not like, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not somebody who's a clinician. So let's look at a way in which you can incorporate these things into your day-to-day life. And I notice that a lot of these videos that are talking about the dark triad traits are talking about impulsivity, aggression, and manipulation. Let's just go with that. They're using these types of words. And that's almost just something that I want to bring into just more discussions. Because maybe you can't tell if somebody's a clinical psychopath, but you can tell if somebody's being impulsive, aggressive, or manipulative. And a commonality among all of the dark triad traits, narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism, is manipulation. These people are going to be extremely manipulative. And we have the definitions that are used in common parlance. And a narcissist is someone who is thought to be full of themselves. They're thought to be someone who just thinks that they're better than other people. They want lots of attention. They have a sense of entitlement. A Machiavellian is someone who is a jerk and manipulative. And a psychopath is someone who lacks empathy. If you just listen to other true crime podcasts talking about psychopathic serial killers, they would just say that, oh, well, they don't lack empathy. Maybe they're a psychopath. And casual conversations, when you're just talking about serial murder with your family members, firstly, they're going to think you're really weird. But overall, they're just going to be using the definition of somebody who lacked empathy. And of course, that's not true, but you will encounter that in discussions. And then we have Lacey says the name was Jeffrey McDonald, not Josh McDonald. I read about the story of Josh McDonald, and Lacey, when I was reading about the story of Josh McDonald, the true crime case connected to him, I was like, well, I'm not really quite sure what to say about it. I'm not sure why Lacey recommended this. There's this guy named Josh McDonald who put on a Spider-Man costume and was walking around beating people up. And I was like, that's the first thing that came up on Google. And I was like, well, I don't really know what to say about that. That's a mean thing to do, and you definitely shouldn't do that. But I wasn't really quite sure how to respond to that. And, for a true crime case, it's just, yeah, that's a weird thing to do. And that's an example of when being weird can be a crime, unfortunately. And Richard Mills is here. Robert H. is here as well. He says, good morning, everyone. Peace and love. Peace and love to you too, Richard. Craig is here. Good day from Melbourne, Australia. From Australia? Across the other pond. How's it going down there, Craig? And Moondust is here, who says, Ned, do you think D.B. Cooper was just plain nuts? D.B. Cooper committed the only unsolved skyjacking in U.S. aviation history. And was he nuts? Some people think that D.B. Cooper was a psychopath, that he was someone who was just cold to the bone. He was somebody who just didn't care about what he was doing. He didn't care if he lived or died. D.B. Cooper boarded a plane in 1971 with what appeared to have been a bomb. He had a briefcase which had some type of red tubes in it that looked like dynamite, and it had a mechanism on it that looked like a bomb. He demanded $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes, which he successfully obtained. Then, at some point during the flight, he jumped out over the Pacific Northwest and was never seen or heard from again. Now, was he a psychopath? Was he just plain nuts? It all depends on who your suspect is, because some people think that D.B. Cooper was absolutely psychopathic, that the reason why he chose to jump out of the plane or maybe even carry a real bomb was he didn't care about anybody else. He didn't care if he lived or died. He didn't care if the bomb detonated and the whole plane blew up. Absolutely no remorse for his actions. And then other people think that D.B. Cooper was doing this for a very specific reason and a very specific motive. And even if that's not psychopathic, that would fall into the narcissistic category. Because here's another aspect of that thing I was talking about before about how psychopaths like to talk about food and drinks and money, and narcissists will talk about belief systems. Another aspect of narcissistic language is talking about the motive, talking about their family members, or just like they had to commit this crime because of so and so, and maybe they're just passing the blame onto somebody else, or maybe they're just actually talking about the reason why they committed this crime. Well, I needed the money because I was about to lose my house and lose my family or something like that. And I don't think DB Cooper actually spent the money because the money has never showed up in circulation. But other than $5,800 of DB Cooper's $200,000 loot, none of it has been recovered. Andrew WVA is here. Good morning, Andrew. Tyler Scott is here. Good morning. Richard says, J.J. Walker Dynamite. You're referring to the something from the Zodiac Killer. And that's back to Moondust. The Zodiac Killer wrote multiple ciphers, coded messages, and in the 340 cipher, there's that's the second cipher milled by the Zodiac. There are two sets of repeating symbols that follow the same pattern that resemble the names J and J. JJ, of course, was the guy from Good Times who liked to say, I'm not even going to do it. He liked to say the word dynamite. I can't do that. Challenge question. Can you do a good JJ voice saying dynamite? I'm not even going to try. But as far as the way that a psychopath is going to function, this concept of lacking empathy is going to be a very, very difficult thing to classify. For starters, empathy takes different forms. And there is the most basic form of empathy, which is emotional empathy, which a lot of people are talking about in common discussions. And somebody even was talking about this on his own show when he said that a lot of people misunderstand how empathy functions. They think that empathy is about caring about other people's feelings. Empathy is about understanding what someone is going through. Like, I broke my arm when I was a kid. You've broken your arm now. I understand how that feels. He's saying that's what empathy is. I've never actually broken my arm. I've never broken any bones, by the way. That was just an example, and that's definitely not everything to empathy. That would be just one kind of empathy, because we also have logical empathy. Logical empathy is what is used by certain people in the professional world, where, like, doctors are reported to use logical empathy, where they recognize that somebody is suffering, so they put a set of steps in place to reduce the suffering. Now, this is very dangerous for people to use in their personal lives because, I mean, if you just say that somebody has a problem and you're going to put a set of steps in place to solve the problem, you could be creating additional problems along the way. Even if it's as simple as, oh, well, you know somebody who feels bad, so you're just going to start meddling in their lives to try and make them feel better, but you could be creating additional problems. And doctors would not be immune from this. And doctors would not be immune from that, and neither would anybody else in the professional world, because anybody can make a mistake. And Richard Mills says, psycho-empathy, love you to death. A lot of psychopathic serial killers really are like that. And there's a movie out there called Diary of a Serial Killer. I hope I got that right, because a lot of these serial killer movies have very similar titles. And it features Gary Busey, but when I was watching this one, and I'm just starting the opening credits, I was expecting Gary Busey to be the serial killer, but it turned out he was actually playing a writer named Nelson, of all things, and he was just kind of like the ordinary nice guy. And the serial killer was actually played by Arnold Vosloo from the Mummy movies, and he also was in the Dark Man sequels. But they're having this conversation about, what do you feel for the victim when you've killed them? And the serial killer says, love. And then the next question was, how many people have you killed? And the serial killer says, how many sexual partners have you had? Now, That's definitely psychotic empathy, because that's deranged and ridiculous types of thinking, but that is what was happening. I mean, in that specific context. But there is also something that is called cognitive empathy. And this is something that a psychopath can actually experience. I was watching an interview with a psychopath on the Jubilee channel, and he talked about how he was able to experience cognitive empathy, where he was not exactly able to comprehend the emotions, not having emotional empathy, but he could put himself in somebody else's shoes. He could understand why people were feeling the way that they were feeling. And you know, I think that the older that I get, the more I'm able to do this, because even if I recognize that somebody did something bad to me in the past and I still think that they are wrong, at my point in life now, I understand the reasons why they did what they did. I know why they chose to do things in that way. Again, it's cognitive. It's like, using the brain and the thought processes. I understand the reason why they made the decisions that they chose to make. Now, there was a very interesting video on the Dark Triad from Sprout Psychology that talked about how when you experience people who are dealing with things like psychopathy and narcissism, some people go on to become criminals and some people go on to become serial killers, but there are people out there who still have empathy for them because they didn't choose to be born the way they were. They didn't choose to be a psychopath. Psychopath meaning you're born with it, sociopath meaning that society changes you that way and creates you. Now, on the one hand, they did not choose to be born that way. On the other hand, they do have conscious choice, and they do have the ability to decide, I'm not going to murder someone. I'm not going to be a criminal. And even if it's not to that level of being a serial killer, even if it's just to a different level in like an abusive relationship, how about criminal behavior in that way? The abuser has the choice to say no. So I really felt that this video from Sprout Psychology was almost overly justifying, or was being like way too warm on psychopathic and narcissistic behavior. And they had a whole bunch of preceding material talking about how narcissism and psychopathy are really passed down genetically, very much so. And they even were talking about studies that were done with twins, even if they didn't cite them in the video, that if there are two twins that are born, even identical twins, then they grow up in different houses, like they're adopted, they have narcissistic tendencies. The narcissistic tendencies will persist in the identical twins in the different households, even if they don't have interpersonal contact with each other. And that makes complete sense with identical twins because, as I understand, their identical twins are monozygotic, meaning like before they're born, there's the zygote, and that separates into two. And identical twins actually have identical DNA, even to the point where you can take a DNA test and the identical twins are going to have the same DNA. Individual variation exists within us human beings. Your DNA is not the same as my DNA, right? But not for identical twins. And we have a comment here from Tyler Scott who says, BTK seem to have the ability to turn these traits on and off. Well, I think this all comes back to the concept of manipulation. And this comes back to the concept of how people are trying to survive. Because one thing that is very, very dark and saddening is that people who have narcissistic and psychopathic and Machiavellian traits are survivors. That a lot of us want to do what was this from Sprout Psychology as well, when they're talking about how a lot of us want to just go to work, go home, live in a house, and watch TV. And some people are fine with that. I'm fine with that. I love watching TV. These days, it's almost exclusively true crime. I rarely watch anything else, maybe the occasional movie here and there. But as far as other people go who have psychopathic and narcissistic traits, they want to frequently change the form of excitement. Psychopaths and narcissists are high in trait openness, open to new experiences, and this can lead to a life of crime. This can lead to why people think that they are attractive. And as I said before, psychopaths, narcissists, and Machiavellians all have a commonality, and that is that they want to manipulate. And I think BTK's ability to turn on and off his psychopathic tendencies was an aspect of that manipulation. I think that he was particularly good at hiding it. He was particularly good at changing things. And we have a comment here from Jerome from the French Wrecking Crew. Hello, everybody. Hello, Ned. How are you doing? Thank you very much for your support. Ah, yes, I gave Jerome a shout out on the most recent Zodiac Monday, and Jerome has a couple Zodiac Killer videos out on his channel talking about his personal theory. Jerome has also been a big follower of the case involving Steven Avery and the murder of Teresa Hallback from 2005. Now, Steven Avery is an interesting example because some people, and Jerome would probably agree, believe that Steven Avery was framed. He is the subject of the documentary Making a Murderer, and then they did a follow-up series with Candace Owens from the Daily Wire called Convicting a Murderer. And they're talking all about how Steven Avery, let's focus first on Making a Murderer. Number one, Steven Avery was convicted for the 2005 murder of Teresa Hallback. Steven Avery's nephew, Brendan Dassey, was also convicted for Teresa Hallback's murder. And Making a Murderer perhaps was either taking a stance or leaning toward a particular stance that Steven Avery was innocent, that he was framed, or that at the very least they got the wrong man. And he's interviewed extensively in Making a Murderer. Then there are other people out there who are taking a very strong stance as well. And they're saying that Steven Avery is a complete psychopath, Dark Triad trace, that he's just a complete psychopath, a complete manipulator. He has fooled everyone. When he was convicted for the murder of Teresa Hallback, the judge even said that you're the most dangerous offender that's ever been in my courtroom. I'm paraphrasing, but it was something to that effect. And a lot of people just simply are on the fence now, just trying to think, well, did he do it or not? I mean, what really does the forensic evidence state? Because a lot of people could just look at the forensic evidence and make the interpretation that Teresa Hallback may have been on Steven Avery's property prior to her murder. I mean, she was on his property prior to the murder, but there's all types of evidence that would indicate that it could have been somebody else, and that would mean that there was reasonable doubt and he should not have been convicted. And the prosecution may have been somewhat slanted. The investigators may have been somewhat slanted. It's almost impossible to know, but I'm almost starting to become doubtful that Steven Avery will ever be cleared. Not saying he's guilty, that he will ever be cleared in that particular case. But that's just another example of how somebody could be manipulative, somebody could be deceptive, because Steven Avery was previously convicted for the 81? Hey, Jerome, can you help me out here? When was the attack on Penny Bernstein? Steven Avery was convicted for the attack on Penny Bernstein. Was it 1981? And she was a woman who was sexually assaulted, and Steven Avery was sent to jail for that. But ultimately, Steven Avery was exonerated because of DNA. He says 1985 attack on Penny Bernstein, and it turned out it's somebody completely different. So Steven Avery's let out of prison for 2 years. Must have been 2003, thereabouts. And then he has this $36 million lawsuit going against the authorities because of the wrongful conviction. There are two theories that people have formulated in this particular case. Number one, they wanted to get rid of this lawsuit, and they also just wanted to get rid of Steven Avery. So the members of law enforcement genuinely framed him for the murder because they were able to close the case. They didn't know who did it. He was in a vulnerable position, so they sent him back to jail for the murder of Teresa Hallback. That's why it's called Making a Murderer. They made him a murderer. And then there's the other camp out there that believes that, all right, this guy got out of prison, even though he didn't commit the sexual assault. DNA evidence exonerated him. Somebody completely different. And Jerome, that guy's name was Gregory Allen, right? That the man who actually committed the assault on Penny Bernstein. So there's this guy named Gregory Allen. With Steven Avery, they just thinking, this guy beat the system. He's thinking, I'm untouchable now. I'm out of prison. This is what freedom is like. So then he decided to murder Teresa Hallback because of his own arrogance. On the one hand, I really hope that he is innocent, but I was watching season 2 of Making a Murderer that featured Jerry Buting, the former defense counsel for Steven Avery, and he just said something to the effect of, "At this point, I hope that he did it. He spent all of these years in prison, and it would just be absolutely devastating if he hadn't been guilty at all. If they just put an innocent man in jail twice, that would just be like absolutely heartbreaking." But if you would like to hear more about the story of Making a Murderer, I have several episodes about Stephen Avery, and I would really recommend that you guys listen to the ones here on Black Box Online Radio about the book Convicting Avery and Illusion of Justice. That's the one that's actually by Jerry Buting. And I have a three-part book discussion on the book Wrecking Crew by Kathleen Zellner, the defense attorney for Stephen Avery. And you can find it under the name Demolishing the Case Against Stephen Avery. Lots of episodes about Making a Murderer here on Black Box Online Radio. And as always, you can hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And please feel free to visit some of the supporting links for this page, including buymeacoffee.com. Buymeacoffee.com/blackboxnid88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. Also, the super thanks here on YouTube. And now, Black Box Online Radio will be available on Spotify. You can download this program, take it on the go anywhere and anyhow. And on Spotify, you can find it under the name of Black Box Podcast or Black Box True Crime. And thank you to everyone who has followed the show over there as well. Omar is here, and Omar says, "Good morning." I was watching a video from Dr. Romani, and she was talking about a different level to the Dark Triad. And she was talking about something called dark empathy. And at the beginning of the video, this was on MidCircle, I believe, she said that dark empathy is just taking the narcissism label and changing it up. But as she was giving the presentation, I began to notice that there was something that seemed a little bit different. And that was that it's almost as if dark empathy is a lighter form of narcissism. I know I said dark empathy, lighter form, but that's exactly how she laid it out. Because I just want to ask you guys right now, everybody in the chat, have you known somebody whom you thought was a little bit manipulative, but maybe they weren't a narcissist? I mean, have you ever experienced anybody like that in your personal life? Because it was my understanding that the way that dark empathy would function is somebody will listen to you. Somebody will engage with you in a conversation. And during the conversation, they act as if they really care. But they're just using it against you. They're just using the information to turn it around on you later on. And, it's just like the example that was provided by Dr. Romani was somebody will complain about having bad experiences in their childhood. And then if somebody is just, again, having a casual conversation, someone will come back and say, "You're starting to sound like your crazy family," meaning that they were just trying to extract information out of you to manipulate later on. And that definitely does sound like narcissism, but I've known people who have done that, but they haven't done it to such extreme levels when I would have ever thought that they were a narcissist, maybe using dark empathy. And there's also a certain thing about how maybe they will have some genuine emotional concern, or at the very least, they will pay attention to your emotions. They will have cognitive empathy to a certain degree, but maybe like after 3 months, they will have a reversal. And the example that was provided was, say somebody loses a family member, somebody dies in the family, and then somebody is grieving, and then 3 months later, they just mention that, they're thinking about their lost relative, and then the person who's using dark empathy is just going to be like, "Oh my gosh, you're still on that subject? It was 3 months ago." Where maybe they actually understood how you were feeling before, but now they don't care anymore because they think that it's been too long. So if they don't care anymore, they're not showing any more regard for your feeling. And Drome says, "Oh yeah." Tyler says, "Yep, my mom's entire side of the family." Well, yeah, okay, Tyler. Think about everything that I said about narcissism and psychopathy and the genetic connections. I mean, these are genetic traits that are passed down from generation to generation. And I mean, like, they exist in people no matter what they've done, no matter what environmental factors that they are going to have in their life, no matter how much love that is given around them, people are still going to develop these types of narcissistic traits. Bear in mind, though, that the reason why some people go on to become serial killers and some people do not is a couple of other things. James H. Fallon talks about neurological functioning and child abuse. And child abuse is actually the biggest factor that would drive somebody to go on and become a serial killer. Melissa says, yes, that's happened to me. A lot of cult leaders will do this to win trust. Sure, they're just trying to extract the information and throw it back in a different way. Now, in the older days of Black Box Online Radio, I used to talk about things that were outside of the true crime world. And I had this segment that I did briefly called the Occult Friday, well before Zodiac Monday. And then I actually changed it to Cults and the Occults, Cults and Occult Friday. And the first episode that I ever did for that one was called The Three Signs of a Cult Leader. And it was based on a video that I saw from a guy named Sean McCraney. And he talked about how there were 6 signs of a cult leader, but I thought that 3 of them were actually, like, I thought maybe like 3 of them were actually solid points and the other 3 were just paraphrasing the first 3 points. But the 3 signs of a cult leader are that, number 1, they tell you that everything that you've learned in the past is wrong. They discredit the ways of the past. That's number 1. Number 2, they then produce a new way to live. And number 3, they tell you that there's something that's missing in your life. And the only way to get it is to follow this new way that they've created. And usually it's love. Like, that's what I think Melissa is talking about. That love or care. Oh, you're not loved. Your parents were absolutely terrible to you. And I will love you. And you just follow my teachings. And now, next, wait for it. Give me money. Live in my commune. And give all of your riches to me so I can look after them for you because I love you. Now, not all cult leaders will do that. Not all cult leaders will do the thing about the money, but in terms of the 3 points that I did say, discrediting the ways of the past, telling you that something from your life is missing, and then producing the new way to get it, or really it's producing the new way and saying that the only way to get the thing that's missing from your life is to follow their teachings. It's a form of brainwashing. But the problem is, though, that goes so far beyond cult leaders, because some people will just do this in day-to-day conversations. And this is what I think dark empathy is all about, where there are going to be less extreme forms of this. Okay, psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism are traits, right? They're not medical or clinical disorders. Well, maybe you're going to go even lower on the spectrum and say that somebody is just experiencing dark empathy, where someone is going to be just, listening to your conversations, and then they're going to throw something mean in to interject. Or I used to know this one person whom I wouldn't call a narcissist, but at very odd times, this person would just say things that were definitely presumptuous and would cross the lines of their authority. And they would use this as a tactic, and they'd just say something that would be completely out of bounds, tell me that I had no idea what I was doing in my life, and I was completely wrong about things. And I'm like, whoa, now wait a second. I mean, this is what I'm thinking. You're just a friend. I mean, you're trying to make decisions about how I should reshape absolutely every aspect of my life. And wait for it, when it doesn't affect you at all. I mean, I'm not your husband. I'm not your, anything other than just a friend. And then they're just sort of like, it's what I think. And, they're just trying to pass it off as they're being brutally honest. But at the same time, brutal honesty is almost always a cover-up for insecurity. But I think that it's also that dark empathetic concept of, you talk to them. They obtained information from you. Now, they're just waiting for the opportune moments to use it against you. And here would be some other things that we can experience with the Dark Triad. And also, if you're in the chat, please let me know if you've experienced this. This is something that narcissists will do. Now going above dark empathy and to narcissism. And this will function in a way when a narcissist will say something that's very insulting. They might even go to the nth degree and be like, you're a bitch-ass fuckwad. Something that's very obviously an insult No mistaking about it. If somebody calls you a bitch-ass fuckwad, they didn't just, think about the weather for a second and they're actually thinking about clouds. No, they were trying to insult you. And you're like, hey, what? I'm not going to stand for that. I'm getting away from you. I'm leaving. And they're like, what? What? Uh, what's wrong? And it's like, you just insulted me. And they're like, what did I say? And then like you just tell them the events that happened. Like, oh, no, I didn't mean that. Like, I thought you were talking about something else, and that's why I said that. Or maybe they'll like just say that, oh, that was you. I was talking about a different person in the story. A very, very blatant lie. And they probably know that they're lying, and they know that you know that they're lying. And this was somebody was asking about BTK. How is he able to control this stuff? All going back to manipulation. It's all just a manipulative tactic. And same with the person who was using the dark empathy that I was talking about before. When I would resist against that, and like just not put up with like somebody's rude comments or something like that, or I just didn't want to hear something that I felt was out of line according to my own judgment, then it was always just about how they would try to downplay and just say that they didn't mean it, and they know that it's a lie, but they're trying to get you to stay with them. Dark empathy, narcissism, they're very focused on keeping people with them because, again, the narcissist thinks that they can do no wrong, so they can't comprehend why somebody wants to leave them. One of the things that I was just so curious about in the psychological world was, why is it that when a relationship or friendship ends, do some people feel really bad and other people don't feel anything at all? Another thing for you guys in the chat. Have you ever experienced this when, maybe a friendship or relationship ends and the other person is just like, maybe they're crying, maybe they're just emotionally devastated, they're just extremely sad, or they're begging you to stay. And then with other people, they're like, yeah, okay, whatever, fine, bye. And I've never found a perfect answer for that, about why some people have this very adverse response to rejection and other people don't care at all, other than they simply have the fear of rejection in itself. But the Dark Triad does talk about this, and narcissists are the ones that are very afraid of rejection. And if somebody is experiencing the first thing that I said, emotional devastation because a friend or significant other chose to leave them, there's a high chance that they might be narcissistic. Wait, with the condition that it actually was their fault, or they've actually done persistent narcissistic behavior for an extended period of time. I mean, some people might just feel bad because the relationship ended and, oh, well, your partner leaves you for somebody else. Yeah, you're going to feel bad about that. But if somebody has done persistent narcissistic things like all of the stuff I mentioned, insults or making out of line decisions, being overly critical and trying to pass it off as brutal honesty, and perhaps deceptive things when they try to cover it up. And then one day you're just like, it's over. You're doing too many mean things, and you walk away. If somebody feels devastation in that specific context, that could be narcissism. Thank you, Snoopy. Now, as far as some other aspects of this, it's my understanding, I was trying to avoid that Machiavellians would really be the people that wouldn't necessarily care too much about these types of connections to other people. The Machiavellian is going to be very focused on manipulation and just using people for his or her benefit. And I've also known people who have experienced this, or they've had these types of Machiavellian traits, but not to the nth degree, not to the maximum level, just to almost a mid-level. And this is something else that you can experience in the sociosexual hierarchy. As you guys see, I'm talking about a lot of different methods, a lot of different opinions from different people. Listen to many, follow no one, not even me. You can subscribe to Black Box Online Radio, but do not follow everything I say like I'm some twisted cult leader. Not what I'm doing here. But as far as the sociosexual hierarchy goes, we have alpha, sigma, beta, delta, gamma, omega, and sometimes lambda. You know what an alpha male is, right? They're the person who is going to be the natural born charismatic leader. The beta male is going to be the follower. But one aspect of beta males in the sociosexual hierarchy is that there is a great desire to preserve the social structure. And they wouldn't necessarily care if someone who's below them on their perceived concept of the sociosexual hierarchy leaves the group. Now, if this quote unquote alpha person rejected them, that's when they would feel the emotional devastation. Because as I said, they're not psychopaths. They feel empathy for certain people, but they don't care. Excuse me again. They don't care about people who are beneath them on their perceived hierarchies. Richard Mills says, never be emotionally played. Oh, no, absolutely not. Now, you guys must have heard of these sociosexual terms alpha, sigma, beta, delta, gamma, omega, lambda. My voice is given out today, so this will probably be a short one. But as far as the concept of a lambda, this is a term that isn't used too frequently, and it's mostly used as a satire term, like a satirical term. And the lambda is somebody who is not necessarily conforming to any of these alpha or beta dynamics. And in short, the lambda is just someone who says, I don't care about this. This stuff isn't real. And mostly it's not, because you've probably been in group situations when you're at the top, you're at the mid-level, and you're at the bottom. And you ever heard that thing about how if you're the smartest person in the room, it's time to switch rooms because you want to be in a room where you can learn things from people, you can absorb information. And let's just go through them real fast. The alpha males, natural born charismatic leaders. Alpha females too. Let's focus only on the terms as opposed to any type of male, female, or gender things. Alphas. Now we have sigmas. They are natural born charismatic individuals, strong people. The quintessential sigma male is James Bond, because even though he's doing all these tough and badass things, James Bond is not necessarily a leader. He's more of a lone wolf type. So that's the big differentiation between alpha and sigma. Then we have betas. Betas are the followers and also subfacet of the sociosexual hierarchy. They like to preserve the structure. Then the next one would be the deltas. Deltas are people who do not want to improve. They only want respect. They would be the ordinary working class average Joe who doesn't necessarily want to move up in any term on any hierarchy. He just wants respect. One step lower would be the gamma males. And gammas, or I said gamma male, gamma female, we're going to use both, right? Gammas would be people who believe that they should be higher on the sociosexual hierarchy because of their intellect, because of their own sense of entitlement even. It could be some type of imaginary abstraction that they've created, but they believe they should be higher, but they're not. And I've known so many crappy-ass gammas in my life. People who act like they should be running the show. People who act like they should be telling you what to do. But they shouldn't. Their lives are an absolute mess. They're at the bottom. You're telling me what to do? You're down here. You know, it's just like, why on earth are you advising anybody? And then you have the omegas. The omegas are even below the gammas. The omegas are the social pariahs. And because this is True Crime Talk Radio, the omegas often go on to become the school shooters, the mass shooters, possibly serial killers. But Tyler Scott says the gammas are the keyboard warriors. Oh, yes. Absolutely. Running their mouth in the comment section like trolls. That's the type of behavior that you would expect from the gammas. And the lambdas are people who are just going to ignore that stuff. But overall, though, you can see how certain things like that would fit into dynamics of human behavior. And I think that these things are just useful. You just use them because they're practical. Maybe somebody isn't exactly an alpha or a sigma or even a beta, or as I said, at different times in life, you can be different times. Sometimes you're the leader, sometimes you're the follower. And Classic Chevy Cat says, I keep thinking of Revenge of the Nerds. The first one, that was such a good movie. Oh, Revenge of the Nerds, Lambda, Lambda, Lambda. That's the fraternity, right? I never joined a fraternity in college. I had many offers. There was really one called, well, I forget, but I didn't join a fraternity because I said I would never join a Greek organization in the university system unless it was Lambda, 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 the fraternity from Revenge of the Nerds. It took me a second. It's been so long since I've thought of that. Thank you, Classic Chevy Cat. All right, though. All right. So as I said, you have these terms of the sociosexual hierarchy. They're not perfect. They're not things that you can just act like these are scientific experiments that you can replicate over time. But how else can you use things like the Dark Triad to incorporate into your life? Dr. Todd Grande has a video on how people in the workplace are going to respond to the Dark Triad. And firstly, this is if your boss is a psychopath, a narcissist, or a Machiavellian. What's going to happen? Because there are 4 different types of responses. The first is the neutral. The neutral person is someone who isn't against the leader, and they're also not for the leader. They're neutral. They're in the middle. They will be a victim of somebody who has psychopathic traits, but not immediately. The next, the Dark Triad leader is going to view the second person as an obstacle. The obstacle is somebody who is trying to do things in the name of goodness, trying to do the things in the name of virtue. Hey, you can't ask people to work on their days off. That's not fair. Oh, well, the psychopathic or sociopathic individual is going to stand up to that, and they're just going to be like, I'm going to do something to get this person fired. I'm going to do something to cause a scandal that's going to ruin this person's reputation. If I'm the boss, I'm just going to fire this person myself. Hey, I saw what you were doing. You're fired. No, I didn't. I saw you. I caught you in the act. Make them believe that they were the ones in the wrong. That's the obstacle. They will be the first person targeted by the Dark Triad leader. The third one is something that is a little bit hard to describe, but it's the facilitator. And the facilitator might actually have a few Dark Triad traits, but overall they're on the leader's side. And then the fourth one is the worst, the co-conspirator. The co-conspirator is somebody who is helping the leader, and it's purely for a selfish reason. They think that someday they'll have the power. They're allowing the leader to do the bad things because they think there's something in it for them, and they usually have Dark Triad traits themselves. Think about what I said. Alpha, beta, delta. Someone who's in that secondary position, and they think by doing bad things that they will rise to the top. So I think that it's very good to just try and look at your own experiences in life and think about how you can possibly see these things, to talk about these things with other people. What are their takes on the subject? Maybe somebody will have an interesting perspective on it. But we live in a world where you learn about psychology in the form of Facebook memes. It's a beautiful time to be alive. What a time to be alive. And I saw this meme on Facebook that said, some people will always be against you because you're you. Some people will always support you because you're you. Be careful who you let into your life. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm so glad somebody finally said that. Because, you have hierarchies, You have dark triads. You have people that are just going to decide that I'm superior to this person for some reason. So anytime there's going to be a form of expression that isn't relevant to them, they will try to stop you from doing it. They will be against you because you're you. Even if you're actually just trying to do something like make them laugh, like to have a good time with them, they will try and put a stop to it. Because number one, it doesn't coincide with their expectations. Number two, it doesn't go in advancing their agenda. Oh, this person is expressing things like humor and they're using language to construct ideas that they haven't done yesterday. That's bad. We got to put a stop to that. I want this person to behave purely in the way that they were before. If you change, they can't control you anymore because they didn't anticipate the change. What an idea. And some people will always be against you because you're you. Now, this is the final point. And that is just that when we bring toxic people into our lives, toxic people will discourage you from everything. So you just give up and you go along with their agenda. This would definitely be in line with trait narcissism. Machiavellianism too, because Machiavellianism is about manipulation. Now the Machiavellian is going to care less about how you respond. And have you also heard the terms narcissist and supply? Like when people are in a narcissistic relationship and it ends, they're just like, the narcissist doesn't have a boyfriend or a girlfriend. The narcissist just has a supply. Someone that just supplies these types of feelings. And Richard Mill says, once I tried being someone else, it did not work out. Oh, I've tried being someone else many times. Many times. And a lot of times people can see that, like that I would be acting in a way that wasn't 100% natural for me. So that bothered them to a certain extent. But the more I began to think about it, it's probably more what that meme said. They didn't like it because it was from me. If it was from somebody else in a different context, then they probably would have accepted it. However, in terms of this concept of toxicity, I've just met so many people who have these types of narcissistic issues in their life where they just discourage you from everything. Even the things, though, that you think that they're going to like say, for example, I knew somebody who had, narcissistic tendencies based on my own unprofessional opinion. They like soccer. Trying to talk to them about soccer, they get mad that I'm asking them about that. Or, like maybe you have like this inside joke that's going with a friend, but you haven't done it in like 2 weeks and they forgot about it. Like, what? What? Why are you saying that to me? And they just would be very confused because they're just simply over and done with it. That whole concept of dark empathy, false empathy. We didn't talk about false empathy yet. This has to be the final concluding segment. False empathy is something where I was using this in the discussions on the book, The Cases That Haunt Us by John Douglas. And he says that he would use false empathy when he was an FBI profiler and he's conducting these interviews with serial killers, try to make them think that he understands them and he's on their side, but really, he's just extracting information. That sounds a lot like the narcissist. It sounds like a lot like the dark empath. But the thing that is with John Douglas, he had a reason for doing that. He's trying to study serial killer behavior. More power to him in that specific context. But this episode of True Crime Talk Radio in the Morning is going to be winding down. Thank you so much to everybody who has listened to this episode. Thank you to everybody who hit the like button. It really helps out the channel. Thank you to all you guys in the live chat. And a lot of things were just incorporated into the world of psychology in this episode. But in some of the future episodes, I would like to do more about forensic psychology, really look about how they're using psychology to solve cases. And the final concluding note would be, there will not be an episode of True Crime Talk Radio in the Morning live on BBOR this Thursday, because I will be doing a bonus episode on the Yuba County 5. And some of you guys have followed that disappearance, and I will be discussing Tony Wright's book on the Yuba County 5. But I invite you to check it out all the same. And I do a segment every Wednesday about Jack the Ripper, Ripper Wednesday. A segment about D.B. Cooper every Friday, Cooper Friday. Sometimes there are bonus episodes that come out on the weekend. in case there is a big true crime breaking news story. If you're into criminal psychology, I did a book discussion on The Sociopath Next Door by Dr. Martha Stout here on BBOR. Some of you might find that interesting. And of course, every Monday, talking about the Zodiac Killer, another Zodiac Monday. That will be all for me now. Thank you so much once again to everybody who's listened to this episode. Sorry I couldn't breathe perfectly in this one, but Snoopy and I will sort that out. Anybody can write the show at blackboxonlineradio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is Ned Dahan. I also have a page, Black Box Online Radio on Facebook, Black Box Online Radio on TikTok, BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram, and I'll see you over there. Until next time, and yes, have a great day to everyone. Until next time, once again.